Not just the Mercy Watchers, but everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Richard Ludwick, and today I have the great pleasure of being joined by Dr. Tom Harmon. He is an associate professor of theology. He also is assistant director of the Catholic Studies program, and he holds the chair from the Scanlon chair, that is, in Catholic theology.
That's right.
That sounds like a lot.
It's a lot.
So roll that right here at the University of St. Thomas.
That's right.
So I'm always fascinated by what drew people to the University of St. Thomas. We all have our own stories. So what's yours?
Well, in 2011, I was just finishing my PhD program, and I was on the job market. And this was, I think, my second interview. And I really liked my visit here.
So now theology is an important academic subject. It's also a high impact for just life in general. So talk to me a little bit about how theology fits into the life of a university, and particularly for our undergraduate students.
Theology at a place like the University of St. Thomas functions as a way to kind of bring disciplines together, actually. So we try to pay a lot of attention to what our students are learning in their major subjects, and to address questions that arise in those major subjects.
So what questions? What questions are you trying to answer?
Well, there are a couple kinds of questions that might arise in the various different disciplines. There are kind of overarching questions like, what's the meaning of life, and how does my professional and family life relate to that? But then there are also going to be particular philosophic or ethical questions that arise in especially professional or technical fields.
Right.
So people who are going into nursing or who are pre-med majors are going to have questions about bioethics. People who are going into marketing are going to have questions about, what sorts of things is it good to sell to people? People who are going to be going into engineering are going to have questions about the built environment and how that relates to the human person. So people who are involved in computer science, especially right now, are going to have many, many questions about how humans and machines interface. And so theology, along with philosophy, can provide at least a start to the answers to a lot of those types of questions.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is that theology really is a toolkit in some sense for understanding oneself, perhaps in the context of the wider world. Now, that sounds a lot like what we do with our core curriculum and how we prepare people for not just their jobs, but their lives.
One of the things that students learn when they get here is that there is such a thing as theology, because theology is a discipline that isn't commonly taught except at the college level, right? So this is a question that most of my students have, actually, is what is the purpose of a theology curriculum, right? And I think that what theology can do is to help you situate your own life in the context of the whole of creation. And it can help you integrate the various different aspects of your life also, because what human beings naturally want to do is to look to something higher when they're guiding their various actions and when they're trying to sort of shape the course of their life. And it matters a great deal what that higher thing is that by which they're directing their life. And so theology at its base is thinking very rigorously and seriously about what the highest thing is that ought to direct your entire life. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do that in heavily speculative and theoretical ways, where you think about things like the nature of the Trinity. And we do that in very practical ways, where we think about moral theology and ethics, what's right and wrong, especially with particular cases that you might run into today.
Yeah.
So I think it's of enormous value in helping to shape your entire life and to be deliberate and conscious about going about making those very important life-altering decisions.
So it's equipping students for an intentional engagement with the world so that they can move through it perhaps more successfully.
That's right, exactly. I mean, there's a huge value I think the University of St. Thomas offers is that we allow you 4 years to explore yourself, your relationship with God and with others, without which you're going to be very disoriented in our world.
I think there are plenty of examples of people who might be a little disoriented in some ways, but we're here to help.
That's right.
So tell me how outside the classroom, how does theology or what you do as a professor, how does that impact our students' lives or the community at large?
Like I said, theology does a lot to integrate disciplines and to bring people together, or at least we try to.
Right.
I find that a lot of my students are interested in insights from theology, from me, that they use in their pursuit of their other studies here, and even after they graduate in their jobs. So I talk to a lot of my students about what they're going to be doing afterwards, and very few of them, you'll be surprised to hear, very few of them go into theology.
What?
But yet,
I bet some of the priests and sisters do.
Well, that's true. That's true. And I have had several students who have entered religious life or become priests. So for them, it's of sort of like fundamental and immediate concern. But a lot of my students are interested in these anthropological questions, like what is the human person, and like what relationship does our understanding of what a human person is have to what I'm going to be doing in my career? Because all of us are human, and all of our careers have something to do with what it means to be human. And unless you've thought a little bit about that, you're not going to have a very good sense of how to direct your life.
Now, that seems to me to be an interesting area of inquiry, the human person, right? So don't we find that people just show up and say, yeah, I know what a human is, right? So dig a little deeper with that. Help us unpack why would we need to be intentional about that understanding?
Yeah, well, I think that there's been a shift, actually. When I started in 2011, I think that there was, I think that attitude that you just expressed was actually more common, that more people would have had this confidence that I already know that. I think my students now are less confident about what a human being is. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that. But to answer the question of what is a human actually requires quite a bit of knowledge and study. You need to know where we came from. You need to know where we're going. And you need to know a little bit about what you ought to do in the middle. But it turns out that actually most people haven't had the opportunity to think really seriously about what does that mean. And so one of the most wonderful things about college is that there's these 4 years that you have, and most people are never going to have anything like it again, where you can think seriously about those very fundamental things that might get lost in the hustle bustle of your daily life otherwise. And it's this beautiful, privileged position that you get to be in with, hopefully, your professors who will become, in a way, your friends along the journey to learning more and more about what it means to be human. It's an exciting prospect, not only for, I think, for our students, but also for us. One of the wonderful things actually about being a professor is that every year we get new freshmen, and for whom these sorts of investigations are fresh.
Right.
Again,
it's a new inquiry.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they aren't exposed to that typically at the secondary level,
That's
high
right.
school.
That's right.
And we talk oftentimes about the dignity of the human person, right? So and unpack that for me a little bit. What does that phrase, dignity of the human person, really do? Is it just a sort of a platitude? What is it?
It can be.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that a lot of people use it, it is. But I think that there's something more profound about it. And that is something we try to teach our students as well. As a matter of fact, that's what we try to do in a lot of areas. A lot of these terms that we throw around a lot tend to get reduced to platitudes. And one of the nice things about our curriculum is that we can dig down with those. For a term like dignity, which can be cheap. It can be sloganized or what have you. What human dignity really refers to is our creation in the image and likeness of God, and our redemption by Jesus Christ, and our destiny in heaven with God when we die. And so it's a very weighty thing. And I mean, C.S.
Pretty
Lewis,
heavy stuff.
It is pretty heavy, yeah. C.S. Lewis talks about something he calls the weight of glory, right? So that destiny that we have with God in heaven. Every person, he says, that you meet has this weight about them. And dignity comes from a word that originally has something to do with weight. So everybody you meet has this eternal destiny that's either going to be in God with heaven or in the other place. And but whichever way you go, it's something that's very important. And so our dignity is caught up with that enormous responsibility that we have to receive that gift from God, our creation and our redemption, and then to cooperate with him so that we might join him in happiness in heaven.
You're right. That is pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Right? Tell me, what do you have to say to the folks that say, well, there is no such thing as dignity, right? I've heard there are even some movements out there that want to get rid of the notion of the human person and dignity both. So yeah. Would that be a good thing? I'm guessing you'll say no. But I want you to share with me and with those who are watching us, hearing us, about why. Why would you want to get rid of the dignity of each human person made in the image and likeness of God?
So there's a lot of reasons. And I think that there are many movements that sort of either explicitly or implicitly want to do this. For some people, human dignity, the notion of human dignity implies that we're somehow over the rest of creation. Or they wouldn't use the term, over the rest of nature, maybe. And that's led to arrogance on the part of human beings. And from that arrogance comes things like environmental degradation, the abuse of other human beings, the abuse of the earth, et cetera. And so there's the idea that human exceptionalism is a dangerous idea that's led to all sorts of bad things. I think that's it's overly optimistic. I think that what that also does is it says that you can treat humans like you treat anything else, that anything goes, basically. I think that itself is the dangerous route. But fundamentally, what's lost is not only a sense of, well, you can't treat somebody poorly, but what's also lost is that once you tell people that they don't have that special kind of dignity, then they start acting like it. And so it's not just how we treat people, but how we take possession of ourselves. It's much harder to take responsibility for our actions, especially for good actions, if you don't have a sense that what you do matters and is in some way required of you because of something that you've received, been beneficiary of. So it's really that notion of human dignity allows us to respond to God's gift, to our position in nature with responsibility. I think it's quite perilous, not only for other people, but for ourselves to hear that message.
So in essence, we're talking about how theology is really a toolkit for understanding the world and how we fit in it. And our dignity, our human personhood, is really the foundation that lets us move out into the world and contribute and be part of society. And if you take away all of those things, then we have chaos. Is that right?
Well, chaos or a type of order that would be inhuman, I think. So I think both would be possibilities. There's all sorts of, if you look through history, there's all sorts of disorder, and there's all sorts of types of order that we would find dehumanizing, even ones instituted by people who are ostensibly Christian, right? But I do think that that grounding in in a theological understanding of creation, and that God also became man, provides us a touchstone for what it means to be human. We have a living model that we follow in what it means to be human, namely Jesus Christ. And so that's something to grab onto, and that this man who was our brother is also our God, whom we worship, makes a huge difference in our apprehension of what it means to be human.
So, oh wow, that's all weighty, heavy stuff, right? But I also know that you have a life outside the classroom. Right? So talk to me about what you have coming up next there.
Okay. Well, there are, I'm working on a couple different books. I'm a scholar of St. Augustine. And so both books have to do with St. Augustine. One is one that I wrote myself. The other book is an edited volume I'm doing, which is going to be called, I hope, something like Augustine and the Frontiers of Pluralism. So it's asking, what can we learn from St. Augustine about living in a pluralistic society?
Well, didn't he know a lot about living in society?
Well, yes.
Even a pluralistic society?
I mean, the Roman Empire was a very big place, right? And there were lots of different types of people. And so a lot of the same questions that we have, he had as well. And so
what would Augustine say about Chat GPT?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Chat GPT I think he would be fascinated by it. It's funny, actually. So I'm going to actually shift to St. Thomas Aquinas because there's a funny story here.
Okay, well, let's shift to Thomas Aquinas. That seems to be appropriate.
So for the University of St. Thomas,
absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, so there's a story that Albert the Great, who was St. Thomas Aquinas' teacher, one of them,
Albertus Magnus,
made an android.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
that's pretty advanced for the 13th century.
So, and this is an ancient legend. And so he had this android. It was just a head. It was a talking head, and you could ask it questions, and it would give you responses, sort of like Chat GPT.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it wouldn't shut up.
Oh.
And so Thomas Aquinas took a stick and destroyed it one day because it would distract him. While he was doing his studies. Okay, so the problem with Chat GPT, I think, there's a couple of them, but one of them is its potential for distraction. Okay? So even more than like an internet search engine, it's going to put all of the data in the world at our fingertips. And I think what we're going to need to do is to develop the virtue of temperance, because we can kind of get lost in trivial pursuits with the AI. You've already probably seen, people just like dinking around with the tool and producing the most ridiculous things. Well, I mean, you could kind of lose yourself in doing that. So distraction's a problem. But I think even more fundamentally than that, but what both Augustine and Aquinas would probably say is that when we use something like this, which is very powerful and has the potential to be enormously useful, it also begins to shape us. And the danger for us is to anthropomorphize Chat GPT. And you already see this, the android, the robots are going to take over the world. And I give it this prompt and it spits back this thing that's extraordinary. And in a way, we're going to have the same problem as we've got this thing that we've built, and we can easily fall in love with it and begin to worship it and desire to be more like it. So I think our temptation is going to be to start becoming more robotic ourselves as we conform ourselves to this very powerful, fascinating tool. So I think what we really need is an understanding of the technology that's detailed and an understanding of its effects, and also an understanding of what the human person is and how the human person is different from the artificial intelligence.
So that takes us right back to the beginning of our talk, right? Where we were talking about what is a human person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love the way you've brought those two together and using Augustine and Aquinas to help you do that. But innovation is one of those things that I was glad to know that Albertus Magnus also had a Chat GPT of his time.
Yes.
But the point is, innovation is something that's always with us, just as the dignity of the human person is always with us. And it is our relationship, right? Doesn't always come back to relationship with humans in some form, our relationship with other humans, but our relationship with the external world as well, so that we don't lose ourselves in it, but we learn how to engage with for the betterment of our own conditions and the conditions of society as a whole. So that innovation piece is something that is so incredible. So talk to me a little bit more about innovation and how you try to bring that, if you do, into the classroom or into an experience for our students.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, so innovation is, I think essentially there's a theoretical and the practical aspect having to do with innovation. So innovation usually has to do with solving a problem. And so you have to have an insight into how to solve the problem. And that insight needs to lead you in the direction of creating a practical solution. Oftentimes, the solutions that we have to solve the problem are going to produce effects beyond the ones that we actually intend. And so a big issue with innovation is comparing the effect of the solution that we want to propose to the other effects that it might have. And so
sort of like the side effects.
If
it's a drug, you've got the thing we're treating, but you've got all these other things that might happen.
Exactly. And so the analogy is, I think, very good with the drug, because what the researchers for new pharmaceuticals want to tell is whether the problem they're going to solve, right, is outweighed or not by the side effects. Because if the side effects are worse than the cure, then it's not worth it. And the same is true with any solution proposed innovatively. So innovation basically needs to serve the human being. And so any innovation that doesn't serve the human being would be a bad change. You need to know, again, a little bit about what the human being is to know whether a solution that you proposed is going to actually hurt or help. And but yeah, I mean, there's always going to be new problems, and so we're always
and new solutions.
That's right.
Absolutely. All right, excellent. Well, Professor Tom, thanks for joining us today,
Dr. Ludwick.
Yes,
thank you for having me.
This has been great. So, thank you for joining us today to have a visit with Dr. Tom Harmon at the University of St. Thomas. God bless you.